I used to think there was something wrong with me, like maybe if I talked less, smiled, more got better grades, or just tried harder, my dad might actually notice me. But no matter what I did, he never looked at me the way he looked at my brothers. My name is Eliza. I grew up in a house where love had favorites, and I was never one of them. My father, Thomas, wasn't cruel in the traditional sense. He didn't yell or hit. His weapon of choice was silence, and it cut deeper than words ever could. When my brother Lucas brought home a passing grade, Dad celebrated like he'd won the lottery. When I brought home straight A's, he barely nodded before turning back to his coffee. I still remember the year I made the honor roll for the third time in a row. I stood in the kitchen holding the certificate, waiting for him to glance up from his newspaper. He didn't. Everything in our house had an order, an invisible rulebook I never got to read. Lucas was the star athlete. He played football, got invited to every party, and walked through life like he owned the world. Noah, the younger one, had this natural charm. Teachers loved him. Strangers doted on him. And Dad acted like they were gods walking among us. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one. The girl who read too much, who stayed up late sketching in her notebook, who kept her voice soft so she wouldn't be accused of trying too hard. I learned quickly that speaking up meant stepping into a spotlight that wasn't mine. So I stayed in the shadows, hoping maybe one day he'd turn and see me there. I remember making a birthday card for Dad when I was 10. I spent hours drawing our family, even adding our dog in the corner. I used a gold marker to write his name, dotted the edges with stars, and added a note that said, "I loved him more than ice cream." He opened it, nodded once, and left it on the table. Later that night, I saw it crumpled near the trash. Lucas gave him a mug that said, "World's Best Dad," and Dad laughed like it was the greatest gift he'd ever received. It wasn't about the gifts. It was the way he looked at them, talked to them, and asked them about their dreams. He never asked me about mine. He never once said he was proud of me. I stopped trying to bring him news. I stopped announcing my little wins. After a while, I stopped expecting anything at all. But the ache didn't go away. It just changed shape. It settled deep in my chest and followed me everywhere I went. At school, at holidays, even in my dreams. It made me question myself, wonder if maybe I was too boring, too soft, too much of something he didn't want. My mom tried. She hugged me a little tighter when she saw the way I watched them from the sidelines. She whispered that I mattered, that I was special too. But even she couldn't stop the way our house revolved around the boys. I was a footnote in a story written for someone else. People say you grow out of needing your parents' approval. I didn't. I just learned how to live without it, or at least I tried to. Because deep down, a part of me still wondered what it would feel like to hear him say my name with pride. Just once. Just to know I mattered. Just to be seen. Walking away from the need to be seen by him wasn't easy. It felt like stepping off a stage mid-performance, knowing no one was watching anyway. But once I let go of the fantasy that he'd ever look at me with pride, I started building something for myself, not for him. My days were packed. I juggled full-time college with 2 part-time jobs, tutoring high schoolers in the afternoon and restocking shelves late into the night. At home, I'd sit cross-legged on the floor of my tiny apartment, textbooks open, ramen growing cold beside me, trying to keep my eyes open just long enough to finish one more chapter. No one was there to ask if I was eating. No one checked to see if I made it home safe. On the hardest nights, I'd sit on the bathroom floor back against the cold tile and cry so quietly it felt like I was trying not to wake the version of me that still hoped for something else. But even in those moments, I never gave up. I couldn't afford to. I taught myself to code using free online courses, working between shifts and school deadlines. Every certificate I earned, I saved to a folder on my desktop titled Proof. Not proof for him, Not even proof for the world. Just something to hold on to when I needed reminding that I was capable even if no one ever said it out loud. There were weeks when I lived on toast and cheap coffee. I couldn't afford new clothes, barely kept the lights on, and yet somehow I felt more alive than I ever did under that silent roof I grew up in. Each struggle sharpened me. Every missed call from my family reminded me of the distance I'd put there on purpose. I stopped hoping they'd check in. I stopped waiting for messages that never came. My phone was quiet. My apartment was quieter, but my mind was loud with plans, with lists, with ideas I didn't have to explain to anyone. This was how I grew. Not with applause or approval, but with grit and solitude. I built a routine that didn't depend on anyone's opinion of me. I learned to wake up early, to budget every dollar, to sit through meetings I had no business being in just to learn what no one would teach me. No one saw it. No one clapped. But I was laying bricks. Quiet, unshakable bricks that would one day become something they couldn't ignore. The idea started small. It was just a concept scribbled on the back of a receipt one night when I was too tired to sleep and too wired to stop thinking. A way to make something easier, more human, using the skills I'd picked up in between shifts and study sessions. I didn't have money or connections. What I had was a laptop with a missing key and a heart full of stubborn hope. I worked from my kitchen table, surrounded by half-empty mugs and post-it notes, building a platform no one had asked for, but I believed someone out there might need. The first time someone paid for my service, I stared at the notification on my screen like it was a mistake. I refreshed the page 3 times before letting myself believe it. It wasn't a lot, but it was real. Someone saw value in what I built, even if they didn't know my name. There was no one to celebrate with. No champagne, no hugs, no dad clapping me on the back saying, "That's my girl." Just me standing barefoot in the kitchen with my phone in my hand, blinking away tears that didn't know if they came from joy or exhaustion. I kept going. Each new client brought a little more confidence, a little less doubt. I was still scared most nights, still fighting imposter syndrome like it was part of the job description. But I wasn't stuck anymore. I was moving, however slowly, out of the dark. I remember walking into my first real pitch meeting. My hands were shaking under the table, but my voice held steady. I had no pedigree, no impressive last name to lean on. Just results. Just grit. When they said yes, I walked out into the parking lot and sat in my car in silence, letting the moment settle in. For the first time, I wasn't surviving. I was growing. And it didn't matter that no one from home knew what I was doing. Their absence no longer felt like a wound. It felt like space. Space to breathe, to become. I was still alone, yes, but no longer unseen. The shadows that once hid me had become my shelter, my strength. I didn't need the spotlight anymore. I was creating light of my own. Quiet, steady, and finally mine. I hadn't been home in 2 years. No birthdays, no holidays, not even a text on Thanksgiving. But that spring, I sent one short message in the family group chat. "I'll be there for Father's Day dinner." Nothing else. No emoji, no explanation. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same. Lawn, perfectly trimmed porch light already glowing like it knew who mattered. Through the window, I saw my brothers laughing near the grill, drinks in hand, their ease filling the space I once used to stand in. I stepped out slowly, the weight of years pressing against my spine. My heels clicked against the pavement like a countdown. As I walked in, the room shifted, but just barely. My mother smiled with the kind of softness that didn't mean anything anymore. My father looked up mildly surprised, then settled back into his chair like I was another guest who'd arrived late to the show. Dinner started with the usual stories. Jake talked about his condo in Denver. Ryan mentioned his latest promotion and how the team couldn't run without him. Dad beamed like a proud coach listing his star players. Every sentence from them drew nods, laughs, and approval that felt rehearsed. I listened. I smiled when expected. I passed the potatoes. And then it happened. Ryan raised his glass, talking about legacy, about how grateful he was to be raised by someone who taught them to work hard. He looked at our dad like he hung the moon. Everyone clapped. Everyone except me. That's when Dad looked at me. Just briefly. Then he said it, voice light, almost joking. And then there's the loser at the table. Still pretending to be the black sheep, huh? The table erupted in laughter. Jake nearly spilled his drink. Ryan slapped the table like he was hearing the best joke of the night. My mother looked down at her plate. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I sat perfectly still while the words hit me like cold water. I stared at the edge of my napkin and tried to breathe through the heat in my throat. I felt 12 again, holding up a straight A report card he never asked to see. 14, watching from the hallway as he ruffled Jake's hair for winning a game I wasn't invited to. 17, packing for college alone while he helped Ryan choose a car. They laughed like my silence was a punchline. But I wasn't silent because I was weak. I was silent because I was ready. Not to explain, not to fight, but to end the story the way it should have ended a long time ago. I glanced down at my purse. Inside it was something he'd never see coming. I waited for the laughter to die, for the moment to land. And then, calm as ever, I stood up and said, "I brought something for you, Dad." I walked around the table, the quiet of my steps louder than all the laughter that had filled the room moments before. The envelope in my hand was smooth black and heavier than it looked. I placed it gently in front of him, right next to his untouched wine glass. He looked down at it, eyebrows pulling together. "What is this?" His voice was flat, still casual, like I might have handed him a card or a receipt. "Just open it," I said. My tone was even calm and practiced. His fingers hesitated before breaking the seal. The others leaned in curiosity, sharpening the air. He pulled the document out slowly, unfolded it, and started reading. The room was silent, the kind of silence that wraps around you when something big is coming but hasn't hit yet. At first, he didn't react. His eyes scanned the words like they didn't make sense. Then his brow creased. Then his mouth opened slightly. And then it hit him. His grip on the paper tightened, his face drained of color. He looked up at me, and this time he really looked. Confused, uncertain, small. "This is a transfer of ownership," he said, but it came out like a question. "My company, Anderson Tech." I nodded once. "Through a silent acquisition finalized last week, your firm is now under my control." His mouth opened again, but no sound came out. I leaned in slightly, my voice steady. "So, no, I'm not the loser at the table. I'm the woman who just became your boss's boss." Jake stopped chewing. Ryan sat back in his chair like the air had been knocked out of him. Neither of them said a word. For once, they didn't have anything clever to add. My father stared at the document as if willing it to change. His hands shook. His jaw clenched. He was searching for something to say, anything that would put the world back in the order he understood. But the words wouldn't come, because they didn't exist anymore. I stood there letting him sit with it, letting all of them sit with it, letting silence do what I never could with words. You never asked what I was doing. You never cared enough to see. I said those things without saying them, and somehow that made them louder. Jake looked at Dad, eyes wide, lips parted. Ryan was still frozen, blinking as if trying to clear his vision. My mother covered her mouth. Her eyes were wet. I turned without waiting for permission, picked up my purse, and walked toward the front door. Behind me, the room remained still, like no one dared move too fast and wake from what they thought was a dream. As I reached the door, I paused just long enough to say one last thing. I didn't do this for revenge. I did it because I could. And because I finally understood I didn't need to be invited to the table to own it. Then I stepped outside into the night air that felt lighter than it had in years. And for the first time, I didn't look back. I didn't need to say goodbye. I didn't need to explain myself to offer any closure. I'd done that 1,000 times in my mind already. The door swung open as I walked out, the air outside cooler than I remembered, but somehow fresher. There was no weight now, no pulling force behind me, trying to keep me tethered. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't care, but because I had no reason to. The past was behind me, its grip loosening with every step. There was no need to hold on anymore. No need to make sure they understood my silence. They never would. Inside, the laughter still echoed from the kitchen, but it felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else. I didn't belong there anymore, not in the way I used to think I did. My footsteps on the gravel were the only sound I heard, steady, unhurried. My heart wasn't racing, wasn't heavy with regret or anger. It was calm, quieter than it had been in years. The weight I'd carried all those years had fallen away. I wasn't walking away from them. I was walking into something better. I didn't need them to validate my success. I had already built that for myself. And with every breath, I realized I was free from their expectations. Free from the idea that their approval was something I had to chase. In the car, I started the engine, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like I was taking my life back. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I had spent years thinking I had to do that, believing their praise would somehow make me whole. But I wasn't broken anymore. I was full, complete, and standing tall for myself. I drove off, not looking back, not even glancing at the house in the rearview mirror. The future stretched ahead, silent, open, and mine. And I knew deep down that this was the beginning of something real. Something only I could define. After leaving everything behind, I found myself in a small but cozy apartment on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The walls were bare for now, and the furniture was simple, but each piece had its place. There was no need for extravagance. I didn't need to impress anyone anymore. I rented a small office space, a corner of a quiet building where I could focus on my work. The hustle of the outside world faded when I closed the door behind me. It was just me and the goals I had set. No deadlines pushed by anyone else. No demands. Just the steady rhythm of my own ambitions driving me forward. A few months later, I bought a car. Not a flashy one, just something reliable. It wasn't a statement, but it felt like one to me. The first car I bought was entirely on my own. No loans from family, no handouts. Just the reward of years of hard work and sacrifice finally paying off in quiet, satisfying ways. I spent my days at the office sitting in front of the computer, creating something from scratch that didn't need anyone's approval. I learned the ins and outs of my business. Every small success was mine, and that was enough. I didn't need applause or a room full of people to tell me I was doing well. I could see it in the numbers and the growth in the emails from satisfied clients. It was a life built on my terms, without anyone's expectations weighing me down. There were no family gatherings to attend, no birthday dinners to fake smiles through. But in the stillness, I found peace. The quiet was mine to embrace, not a space that made me feel small or forgotten. I realized that success wasn't about being noticed. It wasn't about being seen by others. It was about creating a life that felt true to who I had become. A life that didn't need external validation, but was rich in its own right. In that simplicity, I had everything I needed. I was free, and that more than anything felt like a victory. There are moments when the past comes rushing back and you realize how far you've come. Sitting in the quiet of my apartment one evening, I closed my eyes and let my mind wander back to those days when I was just a little girl, desperately trying to make myself seen. I saw her, the version of me who still believed she could win their love, their approval, if she just tried harder. I reached out to her in my mind, holding her close in the only way I knew how. I whispered to her, "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for holding on, even when it seemed like no one cared." I could almost feel the weight of those words, the relief of telling that younger version of myself what she needed to hear all those years ago. The little girl I used to be had no voice, not in the way I wanted to be heard. She didn't have the courage to ask for what she deserved. She believed that if she could just be enough, be good enough, quiet enough, smart enough, maybe, just maybe, her father would finally see her. But she never heard the words that would have healed her. So I told them to her now. You were always enough. You always were. I thought about the nights she spent in her room, drawing or writing, trying to fill the silence with something that felt meaningful. I could see her there, her shoulders hunched, her heart heavy. She had no idea that one day, the silence that crushed her would be the same silence that would make her strong. I realized how often I had pushed her away too. For years, I ignored her voice, her sadness. I was so focused on proving I could make it on my own that I forgot to acknowledge her pain, the quiet, invisible grief that had shaped me. But now in this space I had built for myself, I knew I needed to heal that part of me. I needed to say the things she never heard, to give her the love she never received. It wasn't just forgiveness I was offering her. It was gratitude. Gratitude for how she survived, how she found ways to keep going, even when everything seemed against her. I owed her everything. She had kept me going when I didn't know how to keep myself afloat. I let the tears fall freely, not in sorrow, but in relief. For the first time, I felt like I was truly whole. The pain of the past was no longer a weight. It was a part of me, but it didn't define me. The little girl who had suffered was now the woman who had healed. And in that moment, I understood that loving her was the first step toward loving myself. What I gained was never about their love or approval. It wasn't about the validation that never came or the praise I longed to hear. It was about everything I built in the silence they left behind. I learned to stand on my own when no one was cheering me on. I found my strength in the moments when I had no one but myself to rely on. For years, I thought I needed them to see me, to acknowledge me. I thought that without their approval, I would be nothing. But it was their silence that pushed me forward. It was their neglect that taught me how to rise. I didn't wait for them to notice my achievements. I made sure that I noticed them for myself. The absence of their recognition didn't break me. It freed me. It gave me the space to find my own voice, to choose my own path, and to build a life on my terms. I no longer needed them to say, "You did well." I knew I had. I didn't need anyone else to confirm my worth because I had finally started confirming it for myself. The journey wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness was almost suffocating. There were times I questioned whether I was enough, whether I was on the right path. But through all of it, I learned to trust myself. I learned that the strength I needed was already inside me, waiting to be unlocked. It was never about being seen by others. It was about seeing myself. I didn't need to play their game anymore. I wasn't interested in the approval they could never give. I had created my own measure of success, and it didn't require anyone else's endorsement. What I built was for me, not for them. And with each step forward, I became more certain of one thing: my value was never theirs to define. In the silence, I found my freedom. I found the courage to write my own story, to decide what success meant for me. I no longer needed their validation to feel whole. I had created a life that was mine, filled with purpose and strength. And now I didn't need to look back. I had learned that I could write my own future, not based on their expectations, but on my own. I could define who I was without needing anyone's approval. And that, more than anything, was the true victory. The power to be myself unapologetically was the greatest gift I ever gave myself.